Amanda is going to be speaking on Digital Japan Wonderland, and I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you. And you're turning it over to me, but I thought first I'd like to say thank you to Arnold and Janice and Case Western Reserve University, because I think we've all had a lovely time today, and it's been a wonderful conference. And thank all of you as well for sticking it out to the last talk of the day. So I've been working for quite a while on a book, which is now finally out, Alice in Japanese Wonderlands, Translation, Adaptation, Mediation. And this is the first presentation I've been able to give since the book came out. So I wanted to talk about what I wrote about in the book, but also kind of pick up on a strand of it that is running through the book but doesn't inform a chapter in its own right, because that has had some interesting developments since the deadline for putting any changes in the book. So, in the book, I pick up a variety of Japanese adaptations of Alice, and I sort of examine them against each other rather than against any of Carol's books. And what I determine is that you can adapt Alice without Alice, you can adapt Alice without Wonderland, you can adapt it with or without a whole lot of aspects of the narrative, the setting, all sorts of things, but you must have liminality, which is quite simply the fact of being in one place and simultaneously in another place, such that you are not wholly in either place, but you kind of bridge the two and connect them. And this basic fact of Alice is exploited in so many Japanese adaptations of Alice, in literature, in film, and in a variety of digital media. And that's where we get back to the talk, Digital Japan Wonderland. Because I talk about digital adaptations, the digital realm shows up in the book in various places, and I'll pull them together here. But in May, something really fun happened, and it specifically related to this image, which is a screenshot from the anime series Serial Experiments Lane, which came out in 1998, and this is the one that really just had something interesting happen in May. So we'll talk about Lane and how it's kind of updated and changed. Then we'll go into a sort of Carolian technorati, just a little rundown of how technology and, well, Alice interact. Then we'll look at some techno-Alices before finally concluding with another digital sort of recent development, Alice No Game. So, Serial Experiments Lane. This is one of several works in screenwriter Chiaki J. Konaka's Alice series, as my fellow academic Margarita Long calls it. And I've only put a few of them up on the board, but if we look at them, starting at the top left, you see the PlayStation video game Alice in Cyberland. Below it, you see an early computer-generated animation, Malice at Doll, which is about the Alice character, but a robot. It lies at the center of that. On the top right, you see Digimon Tamers. This is one series in the longer-running series of animated series called Digimon. If you know Pokemon, which is pocket monsters, Digimon is digital monsters. But in Chiaki J. Konaka's hands, we see a new character arise, a Gothic Alice. And finally, I've also added just on the bottom the little sigil at the top of Chiaki J. Konaka's personal website, which he has called Alice 6. And I put all of them together to show you that this Alice series isn't just about Alice. It is also very concerned with understanding the digital world, how it functions, and how we interact with it today. This is going to come to the fore in Serial Experiments Lane in 1998 in a rather interesting way. The protagonist, Lane, is initially utterly uninterested in the digital realm. The world of this series is, well, it displays a lot of foresight, really. Basically, if you think of today's social media, we get that in Lane in 1998, and they function pretty much as you see them functioning today. Lane's not interested in that at the beginning of the series, but she starts to dive into what they call the wired, which is their version of the internet. And here I was really interested earlier this morning when Kenneth Gross said that we fall into such a world and it falls into us, about Wonderland. Well, as the series progresses and Lane kind of falls into the wired falls back into the real world, turning the sky into a little bit of a circuit board, changing people's shadows, even changing people's bodies into these weird wireframe images that you see here. Until ultimately, a character who had previously cast off his physical body and basically killed himself, but destroyed his body so that he could go into the wired, is convinced to come back out of the wired and makes himself a very grotesque, monstrous body that Lane and her best friend, Alice, must confront in the series climax. Now, okay, it's a series from 1998, and you might think, it's popular. Yes, it is. It's very well regarded, but what does that mean in hard terms? So this is just a screen catch from a website, and if you look here, you'll see that over 250,000 viewers rated this as 8.09 out of 10 stars, making it the 475th most respected anime on this website, which is very comprehensive. Overall, almost 750,000 of people have seen it, making it the 247th most popular series. And it is not merely popular and well regarded by fans. In fact, Serial Experiments Lane won the Excellence Prize in the 1998 Japan Media Arts Festival, which is very prestigious. It's been subject to commentary in the literary and academic worlds, such as the Asian Horror Encyclopedia and the Problem of Existence in Japanese Animation by the American Philosophical Society. And I can update that and say it's also been talked about in my book now. Normally when I'm trying to convince people that something is really important, I don't just read off of a website. This is where May comes in. Because this particular website is called My Anime List. And this is a really interesting site. It has kind of three parts. On one side, it's kind of a social medium. People do communicate within this one subcultural interest of anime. It has an informational purpose, which is part of why I wanted to read the website for you. This is the main way I use it, to be honest. But also, it has a sort of organizational function. And here I'll show you just another screen cap from a friend of mine's page, because he actually took the time to make a membership and use the site as it's really intended, rather than just cheating and stealing the information like I do. So you can not only rate series here, but you can track episode by episode how much you have seen of different series. This is really good for someone like my friend Doc here. He watches anime, he's very social. He watches with a lot of other people. And sometimes it's something like he has a cousin and they watch, a series that they're slowly working their way through, basically one national holiday at a time. So in between, say, Christmas and, I don't know, Labor Day, it's easy to forget what episode you're on. But you can use a system like My Anime List, or MALS as it's called, just to track where you are. This part, I'm going to show you a different person's account from a certain day in May. And you'll see that this listing of images with the different anime titles, like Akebi's Sailor Uniform and Alice Gear Aegis Expansion, is slightly different. In point of fact, all of the titles became Let's All Love Lane. This phrase is highly associated with the Serial Experiments Lane anime, not just because of the obvious usage of Lane's name, but in fact because as the wired in this series starts coming into the real world, it starts pushing people to love Lane. In fact, midway through a newscast, a newscaster is talking about the weather or some such, and he just starts drifting into love lane, love lane, love lane, as the wired starts to take over his brain. Obviously, this is a very concerning point in the narrative, and it is expressing a certain fear of technology. So the changing of the names to Let's All Love Lane was in fact done by a hacker who didn't just change anime titles to Let's All Love Lane. He or she also went in and made it impossible to rate Lane lower than 8 stars. By way of contrast, here's Lane's scoring from earlier this week. Still very high and very respectable, but there are a few people who thought they might be getting a fun science fictional romp and instead got this very cerebral musing on the role of technology in our lives today and just said, oh no, this is not for me. Fair enough. But this sort of evolution of Lane as a cultural work. So this series, as I said, it's part of a series of works by Chiaki J. Konaka, who is very concerned overall and specifically concerned with working through the role of technology, specifically digital technology, in our lives today. So that's one way in which Lane is rather tied to technology. Another is in the sense of people like our friendly hacker, who are maintaining this series and forcing us to think again. When we rely on websites like Mal's, are we just sort of accepting the machine's directive to love Lane? Are we somehow giving up our agency, or are we still in control? This is, in multiple ways then, an example of what Heather Warren Crow calls the technoratty's enduring fascination with Carroll's novel. Now, she wrote this in a book where she's discussing digital image culture, by which I mean images of Alice, yes, but also any digital image, a digital picture of someone with their grandkids. She's interested in how this moves through the internet and how it affects the real world. How does it function? At the same time, I can't help thinking that if we look at images like this one, there's another layer to this technoratic fascination that we can dig into. This particular image was created by the Clamp Manga Collective, a highly successful, well-respected group of manga artists in Japan. This is not a manga image, but it is an image of a manga character. This is Miyuki-chan from their manga, Miyuki-chan in Wonderland. But this image was an original creation meant specifically to be their first ever post when they created an account on Pinterest. Clamp with this image is using Alice, basically, to ease their way online. They're using that liminality of hers, her ability to bridge their previous work with their future work, the medium with which they are associated with this new medium that they would really like us to associate them with. So, I'm going to now turn to some of the examples of that technoratic fascination and think about what can we do with them more specifically in regards to Alice and particularly in regards to digital Alices. So, I say digital. The first book that we need to talk about is a classic in the sense of being highly influential and therefore we need to talk about it, but also a classic in the sense of being a little older and therefore not quite as digital as some of the materials I'll discuss, and that is Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. In this book, he discusses a wide variety of media. He even has a chapter devoted to clothing. And in multiple chapters, he introduces Alice as a way of understanding how these media function and how we connect to them. We might jump a few decades further in the future to hear about Henry Jenkins' convergence culture, where old and new media collide. He only mentions Alice briefly, but his main argument is really particularly conveyed through a chapter centered on the Matrix films, alternative reality game, and other works, which we've just mentioned a bit in the last talk. I'd also point out Heather Warren Crow's own Girlhood in the Plastic Image, and the more recent book from this year, I believe, Paul Roquet's The Immersive Enclosure, Virtual Reality in Japan. These are just 4 examples, but what all 4 of these theorists have in common is that they are really interested not so much in Alice as media. They want to understand how the media work, and they are all generally looking at the highest tech media available to them at the time, which is not necessarily digital in one case, but doesn't generally mean digital media. And they all keep turning to Alice. It seems somehow that Alice connects with them as a way of understanding contemporary digital media today. This connection between going digital and going toward Alice is particularly exemplified in the trajectory of Linda Hutchins' A Theory of Adaptation. Again, a classic book that does exactly what it says on the tin. It conveys a theory of adaptation. Hutchin is a scholar whose background is in what we might call older media. In particular, I believe she started out working on a book on Carmen the opera. So this is a wonderful book that brings in literature, opera, various other media, not so much in the way of digital media. But it is a classic, and it's a fabulous book. So, as the years passed by, they sold out the copies they had initially printed, and they decided this warrants a new edition. But the new edition comes with a new byline. Now it is by Linda Hutchin with Siobhan O'Flynn. And I remember reading that and thinking, why? She already wrote the first book, Hutchin. So why do we have a new person's name on here? And what are they contributing? Well, it turns out that Siobhan O'Flynn contributed a new chapter. It's called an epilogue, but it's about 30 pages long, and it covers a lot of territory. All of it digital. O'Flynn's contribution here is that she is expanding this theory of adaptation to the digital realm, because in the intervening years between the first and the second edition, so much of our lives moved into that digital realm that you cannot have a theory of adaptation today unless it analyzes digital adaptation as well. Within that chapter, O'Flynn introduces a number of examples, but has a small section on some Alice adaptations. And somehow, between the move from first to second edition, the addition of this one chapter on digital materials, and this tiny bit of Alice material, well, somewhere along the way, someone felt the need to change the entire cover to be Alice. And this is where I kind of want to sort of pause on the scholarly work for a moment and return to more artistic grounds. Because I showed you 2 examples of Alice digital adaptations that really are fairly straightforward. You have people who did Alice stuff in non-digital media, and then they started doing digital media, and they thought Alice is a good way to sort of ease my way here. You see this with other creators as well. What you're seeing here is part of the Line store. If you don't know it, Line is an app. It's kind of like a text messaging app. And it is really one of, it's super popular in Asia. It's practically impossible to get involved in Asian studies and build business relationships with people in Asia without having Line. And if you do download Line, you can also pay a little more and get these backgrounds, themes, wallpapers, that kind of thing, to make your Line experience a little more you. And I say that, clearly this is an Alice theme that I've brought up, but I was really stunned when I saw this, because I had already seen that exact same black and pink image over a decade earlier on a physical notebook in a Tokyo Han's store in Tokyo, which they just sort of did the same thing that Clamp and Chiaki J. Konaka did. They just took something they had done analog and made it digital as a way of easing their movement. Similarly, but a little bit more like Hutchin here, there is the fashion house H. Naoto. Now, H. Naoto's clothing belongs to the Lolita or Gothic Lolita style. which is itself developed from a mix of the French Rococo aesthetic and Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. I say that. Most of the time, if you look at H. Naoto's clothing, you're not going to get a sense of Alice directly at all. But a while back, H. Naoto decided that they needed a digital magazine. For their digital magazine, they explicitly named it Jabberwocky. I don't know if everyone in the back can see it, but there's a picture of the Cheshire Cat's face in there in a sort of tone-on-tone coloring. You can also see various other symbols associated with Alice, both in this header to the magazine and on the webpage for it. So as H. Naoto moves into the digital space, they take the Alice that pre-existed in their sort of artistic, aesthetic, influential background, and they bump it up a notch. I wondered whether this was going to have any kind of reciprocal effect. If you start off online, as in the smartphone-based game Twisted Wonderland that Disney worked with, in particular, Yana Toboso, the manga artist, but also co-developed with a Japanese game studio. If you start with this Alice adaptation in a digital realm and then move it into a physical realm, does it become more or less emphasized, as it were, as an Alice material? And I found out when Disney did a promotional redo of some of their hotels in Tokyo Disney, it's pretty much, it's about as much Alice-y, for lack of a better word. They emphasize it at about the same level in person as they did online. That brings me to a different group. I started off with the scholarly works with people who weren't really interested in Alice but found themselves doing Alice anyway. And we see this happening outside of scholarly works as well. All of these four examples, like Kern's Alice detector from the Large Hadron Collider, or the Alice project at the top left, which is meant to introduce basically elementary school students to computer science, or Open Wonderland at the bottom, which is meant to be a 3D environment for people to kind of work with their business colleagues who might be based on the other side of the world. All of these are intended to basically create new technological or scientific ground. They're trying to create these discoveries or capabilities, and the creators decided that they needed Alice to somehow get that science aspect across to us, the general public. This particularly comes out in the image on the right, which is by Mado XR, a French group. This is a virtual studio where the idea is that they can effectively project any background you want designed into this room, and then you can film wherever you want within the one studio in just outside Paris, I believe it is. To help people understand the capabilities of this technology, they created their own short film of Alice in Wonderland, just so we understood that we didn't have to be bound by any sort of geographic limit if we want to hire them to do this new technological thing. This seems to be pointing to usage of Alice as a social glue or attractant in the digital realm. So I showed you backdrops online, the app that is. You can also buy emojis. These seem to have been created originally just for Line. And you buy them, unlike the first image I showed you, which is pretty much just visible to you, these you buy and you send them to other people. They exist to help you communicate your emotional state to other people specifically, not to just create a little bit of Alice for yourself. Similarly, the Japanese website Pixiv is oriented around the creation and posting of original illustrations. Now, Pixiv obviously is only going to be successful if people post pictures. So they encourage the posting of pictures by, for example, saying, okay, everybody, why don't you just all make us a picture on the theme of Alice or the Mad Hatter, something like that. They've done a number of themes. They usually have a Halloween one coming up in October, right? But Alice is one of the most enduring subjects for illustration on Pixiv. And it really becomes almost encouraging for the contributors, because you hashtag all of these, and it will recommend, the site will recommend to users that they look at different images based on whether or not you have been interested in similarly hashtagged items before. So this thing actually drives eyes toward specific images. It encourages people to comment, to favorite, to follow, that kind of thing. We also see this in a less Japanese example, which is from last December. Fallout 76 players are putting on a rendition of Alice in Wonderland. This is from a massively multiplayer online game, Fallout 76. It's one in a series. As the title suggests, the Fallout is nuclear fallout. This is a post-apocalyptic, the world described. But somewhere, for some reason that no one really knows that I've been able to find, a group of players just decided to stage a play of Alice in Wonderland in the middle of this world. And when I get to examples like this, I start thinking, you know, Alice is really just functioning as an excuse. Somebody wants to chat with their friend in Fallout. They don't know each other in person. They're on opposite sides of the planet. Okay, we gotta come up with something we can do together. Or maybe somebody really likes to draw, but they really just, you know, they want people to look at their drawings. Okay, well, Pixiv is asking people to draw about Alice. I'll do that. And then people will talk to me about my art. Or maybe I like somebody else's art and I want an excuse to send them a message or a comment. I like Alice, I've seen other Alice things, let's talk about that. This brings me to the final point that I mentioned, another new discovery that I wasn't able to include in the book, Alice No Game. As strong as that image or the title of it suggests, this is actually the name of a game, Alice No Game. It hinges on the fact that NO, or no, in Japanese, translates to apostrophe S, so this means Alice's game. But it also hinges on the fact that Japanese people know English. Alice, no, game. And I say that because this was a campfire. Okay, so, and if you don't know, campfire is like Kickstarter. So this is a crowd-funded attempt, and I say that it's a successful attempt. 261 people contributed about $40,000 to create the Alice No Game trading card game. It was complete with very strong visuals, a very clear plan for production. At the beginning, there was even a website. And as you can see, it was meant to be delivered in 2022 of the summer. It's not there because it was a scam. Yeah, it's in the title. I'm sorry, but it says Alice, no game. It's not coming. And this is where I keep coming back to, like, Alice No Game is a thing that people still, I've been doing research on this ever since I found out about it. People are still tweeting back and forth. They are using the Alice No Game scam as a way of pushing Campfire to watch over these accounts more closely, of asking whether the government should regulate this stuff. There are people talking about this and working on this now, today. They are organizing digitally. This is an entirely digital, I don't know what to call it, a thing, right? That has drawn people together. I believe it was 261 of them that have somehow at least participated, not including myself. I just participate by talking about the other 261. But Alice is seeming to function in the digital realm, for things that do not leave the digital realm, as a sort of attractant that pulls people together. And so I say that, as I said, I have a little bit of an update from the book, but I wanted to leave you with this idea of Alice No Game not being a game, but also still somehow being a very strong force that pulls things together. So thank you very much.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Well, so I read your book and I kind of understood more or less where you were going on with the idea of what Alice represents in the Japanese culture in regards to the manga, the anime, but also just seeing things like the Alice's cafes, the Lolita fashion, how sometimes anime gets the Alice in Wonderland filler episode, but it's not really part of the story, it's just there. Or sometimes they just dress up their characters and get Alicified or Wonderlandish-fied. And so I wanted to know your opinion on what makes the Japanese like so obsessed with Alice in that they want to be part of it, even though their story or their concept object has nothing to do with that.
So I've thought about that a lot, and I hope this will not be an upsetting answer for you, but I don't think they are more obsessed than any of us. What I think is going on is that in Japan, the way the different media industries developed, you don't make one anime. You make a manga and an anime and a trading card game and then a whole bunch of clothing that people can wear, and by the end of it, you've got 20 adaptations of Alice, all related to this one initial idea. We see a bit of that in America, in particular with the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff. That really, I think, was a fabulous example of how you can get 20 different Avengers things at one time. But in Japan, they've really, it's the baseline of how you do things. That's the expectation. So, for example, the Alice No Game initial campfire, I believe, had a video attached with it, like an animated video attached with it, even though there was no plan to ever do animation for that. And it did have a website that people were actually able briefly to log into before it disappeared from the face of the web. So that kind of encourages the multiplication of adaptations, as does Japan's, and I say this with a bit of hesitance, but they're a little nicer than we are in America about not suing people who just really love a thing and want to draw a picture of it. When you don't have concern about being sued for everything you're worth just because you really like Disney and you want to make a thing of it, it helps in terms of spreading that thing in your culture.
Did you have to become fluent in Japanese to access all this information, the websites, and do the research, and be able to read it? And
It depends on which thing you're looking at. So, for example, Clamp's manga, I'm pretty sure pretty much all of them have been translated into English. And their Pinterest account, I think you can get a sense of the pictures, certainly, without having to know Japanese. The No Game one, as you can see, that website's in Japanese. So you can look at the pictures, and I'm happy to send anyone a link if you really want it. But yeah, that you need some Japanese for. So it's a mix. I can tell you, for the book and for anything else I publish, I know I'm writing in English and not Japanese. I try to search out English language versions of the materials that I cite where possible. So for what there is available in English, it will be, some of it is more clearly available through the, the bibliography and such.
Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Amanda. It was great.